Yesterday, we played a clip from the debate that I had with Charlie Kirk at Politicon. And as we were playing it, it was a TYT recording. 20 minutes was missing, and it was 20 minutes in the middle of the debate. And it came in at about 20 minutes in, right?
About 24, yeah.
And so what we're going to do, and we're playing the debate and we're giving commentary. We were going to try and stitch it in, but then we realized, like, wait, I'm wearing a different shirt. And so we want to put this video out there. If you, in particular, if you are a young person and you come across Charlie Kirk, you should know that a lot of what he says is not really sound. And we're going through this debate to show you that. It's really a lot less. This debate, at least in my mind, is a lot less about me beating Charlie Kirk
Murking.
or winning a debate or whatever it is. Or murking. What is it?
Murking, yeah.
Murking.
Yes, murking. Just go with that in general, Sam.
It was really more about giving folks who are not aware of what he is selling more insight into this product being defective and, maybe some decent packaging. But when you start to dig into it, it's not very substantial. But so here is the middle segment of the debate, and then we'll just run into the to the beginning of the debate. So forgive us, but this is what it is. We're picking up now. We're talking, I think, about taxes, right? And then we're going to get into regulations.
No, you're right. So tax cut, where an average middle-class family had a $2,700 tax cut, where you have the corporate rate that went from 35% effective.
Pause it for 1 second. Now, I said in the other debate, and we should also say that we're speeding it up so that people can go through this, without spending hours. The average tax cut was $2,700, but the median far less, closer to $800. So when you add together the tax cuts of the millionaires and the billionaires with the middle class, the average is $2,700. Just like if Bill Gates and I were in a room, our average net worth would be $30 billion. But I got to tell you, I did not win the Mega Millions last night, so I don't even have hundreds of millions at this point. But continue.
A lot of corporations did not pay that. They used loopholes, of which I disagree with completely. Went down to 20% effective in January, and they used that money to invest in capital infrastructure, or they repatriate
stock buybacks.
So
they're using the money to buy
not exclusively. So stock buybacks. How about companies where the actual employees own the stock, and their own net worth goes up? Aren't they part of the middle class?
I am sure there are some members of the middle class who benefited from the tax cut.
That's what I'm saying, Sam.
The overwhelming thrust of the tax cuts goes into the wealthiest pockets via either stock buybacks or through capital gains or through having an S corp and paying less in taxes. So look, we could cherry pick things. You can say Illinois. I could say the worst 16, the lowest 15 states in the country in terms of education are all run by Republican governors, except for Louisiana, which had Bobby Jindal for 8 years up until 2016. But cherry picking doesn't work. You wouldn't. There's a lot of things.
The idea of zero-sum game, though. The zero-sum game.
You wouldn't like me to cherry pick.
That's what I was trying to get.
Pause it. Now, let me just say here. Now, I don't know if this was appropriate on my part. By cherry picking in his organization, I think in my mind at the time, I will cop to this. I was going to maybe bring up the fact that his number two for a couple of years at this organization, who he went on to praise and praise and praise, turned out had to be fired only after it was leaked by someone else that she was writing all sorts of things that were of racist sentiment. Things like, I hate blacks. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say it. I fucking hate blacks. Or cherry picking like, the Florida division of his organization, which, had a private sort of Slack or WhatsApp saying, don't mention Richard Spencer too much. He was a guy who was just accused of domestic abuse in addition to being a white supremacist. And don't use the N-word too much. And let's see if I get this quote, don't hate Jews just because too much.
Well, that's
So you could either hate Jews just because,
Those are
or
great
you could hate
qualifications.
Jews if you had reasons too much, but or that they were kicked off some campuses because they were funneling in thousands of dollars of dark money to influence student government campaigns so that they could, and also he was caught up in something where he was intimidating some left-wing voices on college campuses. I probably in the
with Niall
context-
Ferguson.
Huh?
That was with Niall Ferguson.
Right, with Niall Ferguson.
Yeah, that was fun.
I don't know if I should have brought that up or not. Maybe it was wrong of me to sort of do it in that context, but that's what I was alluding to. I just want to cop to it. All right, continue.
The philosophical difference, because I don't believe when someone gets rich, someone
Well, you
inherently
can
gets
talk
more poor.
philosophy, but we don't need to.
But
we have data.
Okay, but the data, right? So the data. Fine, Sam. If you want to talk data.
And Charlie, I'm going to give you the last word on this.
Yeah, but I mean, so again, I was thinking maybe because again, you were just talking about cherry picking, and then you were cherry picking, and I was trying to talk about philosophy, which is I don't believe in a zero-sum game. I believe in a market economy. When you trade, both parties equally get richer when you trade, and standard of living goes up, prices go down, and you have abundance. You have an abundance problem, not a scarcity problem in the West. But so just I'm trying to maybe I'm failing to understand how, because the left seems so adamantly opposed to the policies that have delivered us a 4.2% GDP rate, the lowest ever black unemployment rate, the lowest ever Asian American unemployment rate, the lowest Hispanic unemployment rate, the lowest veterans unemployment since 2001, a $2,700 average middle class tax cut, and the economy is so good Obama's trying to take credit for it. And so, but Sam, can you give some credence to the idea that when you lessen government burden, you couple that with a massive deregulation, the largest deregulation agenda in 100 years, are you willing to give an inch to say that maybe something Trump has done has benefited the well-being of people in the middle class?
All right, well, you keep repeating the same thing, and I keep explaining.
And it doesn't make it less true, Sam.
Well, it makes it, I'm explaining to you why it's irrelevant. Because, yes, there has been a trajectory where we have seen all of the unemployment gains that you've talked about. We have seen stagnant wages. That is a fact. The buying power of the middle class has dropped. You talk about rolling back regulations. Let's talk about that.
That's good. Let's talk about that. I'm glad.
I want you to name 3 regulations that have been rolled back that have helped the middle class. And I'll name 3 that have hurt the middle class.
How about rolling back Obama's war on coal?
Okay.
That has created hundreds of thousands of jobs throughout Appalachia and brought down utility costs in over 30 states.
What?
Pause it for me. I should probably let that roll because
Could you let that be a drop, first of all? What? That needs
That's
to be
like
a drop.
full-on key change.
the folks who lived in West Virginia and Appalachia in the audience, everyone started laughing at Charlie Kirk at that moment. You can just simply go and Google coal jobs created and
Hundreds
see.
of thousands.
well,
Almost a million jobs.
I actually did J. Cole, and it gave me
You should
what's
listen to
happening
him.
with the rapper.
J. Cole's really good.
Coal jobs created in the news, and you will see that there has been maybe like somewhere around 3,000 jobs that have been added with coal across the country. I mean, you're still seeing like
Well, you see his point.
yes.
So I think you
So-
would concede jobs.
There was there's a new round. This is from the Tribune Review. New round of grants will help coal-impacted communities. There's been 120 jobs created from that. I mean, there's probably thousands of coal jobs maybe that have returned, but not hundreds of thousands. But here, continue.
Okay.
That has created hundreds of thousands of jobs throughout Appalachia and brought down utility costs in over 30 states.
What?
Yes. So this is a
People
big,
laughing in the front. From West-
I smile and I'm happy when the people of West Virginia actually have jobs, unlike what Hillary Clinton said, we're going to destroy all your jobs and we're going to find another way to give you meaning.
That's one.
And also, if you go to the EPA agenda, there was a specific regulation under the Obama era that categorized lakes and tributaries in the backyards of certain farmers as oil spills. That's number 2. And number
I'm sorry, wait, walk us through this by saying you can't
yes,
dump.
yes, Sam,
dangerous
being
chemicals?
condescending about a fact does not make it any less true. So under the Obama era,
Well, wait a second. I'm just asking you, walk us through
Yes, so
how having farmers dump pesticides in tributaries.
Okay, that's not what I said. They classified lakes and tributaries in the backyards of certain farms as oil spills, which is a complete miscategorization and abuse of the Clean Water Act of 1976. So that was a abuse of power under what I like to call the Employment Prevention Agency.
And how many
or
jobs do you
the Environmental Protection Agency?
That were created by that?
Well, it definitely saved all these farmers hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal costs and the fact that they can still be operating. Would you like more regulation, Sam? How about
one more?
How about the thousands of consumer regulations that were finally rolled back under the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau so that we do not have to go through excessive amount of regulation to get small business loans? Happy to defend that any single day. I'm happy to defend the deregulatory agenda of Trump against the excessive regulatory agenda of Obama.
So
there's three.
First off, all right, so first off, let's just start with this. Donald Trump has not rolled back that many regulations. That's the reality. The rate in which our regulations have grown has definitely been slowed. He's done about half of new regulations that Obama and Bush did up to this point. That is true. But let's talk first about the regulation that you mentioned in terms of the coal-fired power plants. This will cause 3,600 deaths, 90,000 cases of asthma, 1,700 heart attacks. The expenses associated with this are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The mercury and air toxins rollback will cause 11,000 deaths annually. The asbestos rollbacks will cost up to 40,000 annual deaths. The EPA, the Trump EPA, says that for every one regulation, $1 worth of regulation that costs an industry or whatnot, $14 of economic growth are generated. What's an example of that? Light bulbs. For years, conservatives were angry about light bulbs. I don't know if people here are old enough to remember this. But the idea that the U.S. government would require more efficient light bulbs was the loss of liberty to a scope that we can't even imagine. What has happened is consumers have saved tens of millions of dollars because they don't have to replace these incandescent light bulbs. We've seen in terms of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau saved consumers $90 million worth of bank fees in the last year of the Obama administration alone.
All right, pause it for 1 second. This is incorrect. I misspoke. It did not save consumers $90 million worth of fees. It saved consumers in the last year $900 million. Over the course of the life of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, up until the Trump administration basically stopped all of its investigatory actions, its attempts to stop, malfactors like Wells Fargo and whatnot. It saved consumers and returned to consumers $13 billion. $13 billion with a B. But continue.
Real quick.
So I misstated that number.
Real quick. Do you think Charlie took that the employment prevention line? Did he test that with his mom first? I'm just having a little bit of that's a very funny joke,
that's
Charlie.
That's a very funny
joke.
You
use that when you debate that mean man from Sex and the City.
That's the type of line that's useful if you're doing dumb radio.
Well, his whole thing sounded like in that moment like a campaign speech.
It was also, but you're right. It was a little morning zoo too, because there was he also is really. I didn't notice this as much at first, but he's very in the school of if I'm wrong or I've said something that just doesn't sound credible. If I raise my voice
and act like the teacher,
and act like I'm no, I will double down on that. Then that confidence will power me through nonsense.
It also seems like some capitalists might be sneaking into the nebulous middle class category when he talks about the people who own farms and businesses, right?
All right, let's let him go.
The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau saved consumers $90 million worth of bank fees in the last year of the Obama administration alone. There has not been one enforcement action since the Trump administration has taken over.
So what's the CFPB budget?
What is the budget? It is completely funded by fees that they get from the bank.
Okay, so forcibly take money away from the people that are depositor and then say that they're saving $90 million of fees on the back end.
That's not the way it works.
No,
pause it for 1 second. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was set up in a way that would inoculate it from a Republican House, or let's say a Democratic House that was in some way hostile to it. But it clearly was set up to avoid pressure from politicians because it is self-funding. Its funds, its operational funds, come from fees it collects from banks. But then Charlie has a problem with that because he thinks that's unconstitutional because Congress can't defund it. But here.
When you deposit your money.
So the banks make money by people putting money in
pause
it.
You got to go back here because this is also really important for people to understand. Charlie does not seem to understand how banks make money, or he assumes that depositors would have to pay these fees to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But when you deposit money, they may charge you some bank fees, your checking account. Maybe you get a free checking account. Maybe you get an ATM fee or whatnot. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau actually also capped those, but I think the Republicans rolled that back. But so you get fees for putting your money in there, but these are not fees that are associated with their fees to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The bank doesn't take your money to pay these fees. They have to pay it out of their profits.
You are aware that the money in the bank doesn't just sit there, Sam.
Well, here we go.
Worth of bank fees in the last year of the Obama administration alone. There has not been one enforcement action since the Trump administration has taken over.
So what's the CFPB budget?
What is the budget? It is completely funded by fees that they get from the bank.
So forcibly take money away from the people that are depositor and then say that they're saving $90 million of fees on the back end.
That's not the way it works.
No.
When you deposit your money.
So the banks make money by people putting money in it, and then they borrow it out. So those are depositors. So you're taxing the depositors to then put on the back end of the government agency that is run and the CFPB should be completely abolished. It's an unconstitutional agency. And it's used as a weapon.
Bankers do not loan out their depositors' money exclusively. That's why you have capital controls. They loan out a lot
exclusively. That is one form and function of a bank.
But it goes back to you.
Well, obviously it goes back to you. Know most of the money in your bank's actually not in there, Sam? You know that,
yes.
Right? Okay, that's the way a bank works. So you have the FDIC that insures it up to a certain amount, but that money is probably somewhere else in the economy on loan or on lien to somewhere else to try to make the bank money. So when you're taxing the bank to try to fund the CFPB, you're actually taxing the depositors. You're taxing the money within the bank. The bank is comprised of the people that put the money in the bank.
No, you're taxing the profits they make off of their loan.
And they make So let's talk about banking. So first of all, they make money off of.
Let's stay with regulation.
Okay, Sam, they make money. They make money off of most of the money that banks used to make until Dodd-Frank was off lending to small businesses and local communities. But Dodd-Frank completely obliterated the idea of the local community bank. We have seen a sharp decline in community banks.
We have not seen a sharp decline in community banks unless you look over the past 30 years where we have seen a precipitous decline in those banks because of mergers and acquisitions.
Right. So we saw it. I will repeat myself because it's correct. Since the financial crisis, Dodd-Frank was a weapon used against small community banks that has hundreds of millions of dollars of regulation that put on small and local community banks. You know who loves Dodd-Frank? You know who's lobbying against the repeal of Dodd-Frank? Something that you and I can agree with. Goldman Sachs, which completely own the Treasury Department in both administrations, by the way, whether it be the Bush administration, the Obama administration, or the Trump administration. Goldman Sachs has an inside-out access to the Treasury Department. They are lobbying against a repeal of Dodd-Frank. Now, why would that possibly be? Because Dodd-Frank is used as a hedge against small and community banks to protect the Wells Fargos of the world, the J.P. Morgan Chases, and the Goldman Sachs. And so they use regulation as a competitive edge.
Will you join me in calling for a 21st century Glass-Steagall Act? We can deal with government. We can deal with government.
I would actually. I think we should get rid of the carried interest deduction. I think you and I could agree.
Pause it now. Now listen. This is sort of stunning.
That's amazing. I will join you in supporting another thing that will massively benefit wealthy investors.
Well, no. The carried interest deduction is something that we should be repealing. It is so completely far afield from the Glass-Steagall that at that moment I realized he doesn't know any of what I'm talking about. I don't think he knows what a 21st century Glass-Steagall was. I'm not even convinced that he knows what the original Glass-Steagall was. So, Charlie, if you're listening, I'm going to tell you right now, and you can all obviously look this up. But Glass-Steagall was a law that was put in place following the crash of the banks in the Great Depression. And basically what it does, the original didn't do exactly this, but it would do more or less this. It constrained commercial banks from joining with investment banks, so that commercial banks, where people have their money invested, was not subject to the same risks that an investment bank would take. Because if a commercial bank goes under, a big one, a lot of people lose their money. I mean, you're federally insured, and that came in after the Great Depression, up to $250,000. But all that money can be wiped out, which put not only a big strain on the government, of course, but on all sorts of businesses that have more than $250,000 maybe in the accounts. And so the idea is separate these two things so that these banks won't be too big to fail, that their failure will not bring down the entire economy, and that more speculative business will be separated from the more conventional vanilla business. The carried interest loophole has nothing to do with commercial banks or investment banks. It has to do with hedge fund managers. And hedge fund managers, what they do, this is private equity. They go out and they get a bunch of rich people and they say, let me manage your money. We'll go and we'll do maybe venture capital, or we'll make some bets against other companies, whatever. This is what hedge funds do, all sorts of different things. But the managers of these hedge funds escape paying taxes on the money they make by claiming that even though all they're doing is managing other people's money, that it's like their money. And so they get, all right, let's say I'm managing $500 million, and I take 1% of what I'm managing and what I earn. And I am taking capital gains as if I have invested money, but I'm not investing money. I'm just managing that money. And that's the carried interest loophole. They call it carried interest because they want to make up a name that makes it sound like I'm just a financial advisor. And I don't need to be taxed on that money at a wage rate. I want to be taxed on it at a capital gains rate because it's much lower. I'm glad he's for getting rid of the carried interest loophole, but it has absolutely nothing to do with what we were talking about, which leads me to believe he doesn't know any of what we were talking about. I mean, it literally is the equivalent of saying, like, I'm going to open up a dog kennel. Well, I'm against opening up a dog kennel, but I do like cats.
It's sort of like talking to a bot online.
It's weird.
Yeah, but government sacks, that's my son. Boom.
I continue.
It's completely different from what I've just asked you.
Well, it's a component of what many people on your say. No, I will not join you in a 21st century Glass-Steagall Act. No.
Why?
All right, hold on, guys.
If you want to cut down on the power of the big banks, why wouldn't you?
Well, okay, so you would.
But if you're sincere,
why wouldn't you want
one way that would actually cut into the size and the power of those banks?
Because it wouldn't do that. Because every single time you try to penalize the power of Wall Street, every single time you try to use government to go after the people that have the power, the exact opposite happens. You have an oligarchy.
Let me give you a great example of when that didn't happen. After the Great Depression and for the subsequent 65 years that we had that regime. It was only after the Clinton administration, when we had a Republican Congress and Senate and a president who was extremely close to the banking industry. In fact, his Treasury Secretary was a guy named Robert Rubin, who wanted to get rid of Glass-Steagall so that the Citibank could merge with Travelers. And they did, and they became Citigroup. And then Robert Rubin left the government and became a very handsomely paid vice president of, if you can believe it, Citigroup.
Because every single time you try to penalize the power of Wall Street, every single time you try to use government to go after the people that have the power, the exact opposite happens. You have an oligarchic class that is created around Washington, D.C., and the biggest companies get more powerful, and it totally pushes out competition.
You mentioned the financial crisis. The financial crisis
Let's talk
was a
about that.
product of the rollback of Glass-Steagall during the Clinton
Incorrect.
administration.
I'll let you do your case of why you think 2008 happened, and I'll tell you what really happened.
Well,
I do have talking points.
it was
on this
not
one.
the cause of 2008 of the initial crisis. It was the cause of the severity of the crisis because we allowed commercial banks and investor banks to commingle, and they were too big to fail, and it almost pulled our entire financial system under. And so you return to a day which existed pre-96 where these banks cannot commingle. If one of them fails, it's a problem, but it's not one that is going to throw our entire economy into jeopardy. That is why the debt increased during Obama years, because the economy fell off a cliff. And so if you want to diminish the power of Goldman Sachs and of Citibank and Wells Fargo, and we can agree on this, let's call for a 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act. We can do something bipartisan. This will be great. And we can actually diminish the power of these banks.
So I will say you'd actually find more acceptance of that argument in me than most people, because I think there is some merit to the argument that the repeal of Glass-Steagall did open up the reckless behavior of banks. However, I would say in talking about 2008, it was not the primary factor nor the secondary factor of why that financial crisis was created. It was first and foremost Fannie and Freddie, which is a government-sponsored institution.
Did you see that? Like I actually and I knew the reason why I knew what he was going to say is because this was the major talking point that came out of the financial crisis. If you go back, you can see I'm mouthing the words Fannie Mae because this was the talking point, and that's what Charlie has. He has talking points. And you can go, I mean, this gets very weedy. But as you know, the financial crisis was a function of mortgages being issued willy-nilly to people who did not have any financial savvy. In some instances, depending on the region, to people who were taking out 2 or 3 mortgages and flipping houses. Now, none of these people did it to lose money, right? So they didn't really know what they were doing. When you go to a bank, there's a reason why they call them loan officers. Is because they have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that you, the client, are worthy of loaning to. That is their responsibility. That is why their banks get licensed. Many instances that didn't happen. Mortgage industry was set up to, and what would happen is I would make a bad loan to somebody. I would sell that loan, and there became a secondary and a tertiary, and in some instances like a 4th level market for these mortgages to be combined together as these financial instruments and paying off and paying out dividends. These are derivatives. And then there were derivatives on those derivatives, side bets, essentially, that they're going to fail or go up, almost like insurance, hedges. And the problem is that everybody assumed that these mortgages were good because there were 3 private rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor, and one other. I can't remember what it is. And they issued them all AAA because of the relationship that they had with these investment banks. The investment banks would hire them to rate their own product that they were selling. And of course, if you wanted to get higher again, you rate it well. That was a huge mistake. About 3 or 4 years into this, somewhere in like 2005 or 6, Fannie Mae, which had not engaged in buying these derivative mortgages, got pressure to do so because they were leaving a lot of money on the table, and they were a quasi-governmental agency. Not fully governmental, but quasi. And so there was a lot of pressure for them to make money when everybody's making money hand over fist. They got into it very late. So they were not the cause of this. This was all happening everywhere. It's just at the end, they ended up holding a lot of this stuff. They weren't the only one. Lehman's went under, Bear Stearns, Goldman Sachs had to be completely bailed out. There were others. And so Chase, Citibank. So Fannie Mae was definitely a player, but they were no way the proximate cause. It was just there was a huge real estate bubble. And when it burst, Everything fell apart because of the interconnectedness of everything. We can have a bursting real estate bubble, but unless there is like this ongoing interconnectedness, it's not going to threaten the economy like this did.
You raised some interesting points, Sam. However, you think we should pay exorbitant fees. I think that capitalists take risks, and that's a good thing for people in the economy.
Power these banks.
So I will say you'd actually find more acceptance of that argument in me than most people, because I think there is some merit to the argument that the repeal of Glass-Steagall did open up the reckless behavior of banks. However, I would say in talking about 2008, it was not the primary factor nor the secondary factor of why that financial crisis was created. It was first and foremost Fannie and Freddie, which is a government-sponsored institution that has yet to be held accountable, that has never showed their books to the taxpayers, AAA bond rating crap. AAA bond rating mortgages where people had FICO credit scores that were beyond F, that had median income around $35,000 a year, never actually visiting the houses that they were giving the mortgages to. It was B and B minus loans that they were looping together with AAA bond rating, and they were in bed with the rating agencies. So I think Sam and I would agree that there was widespread collusion. Fannie and Freddie is not Wall Street. It is a government institution that Congress sanctioned, has yet to be held accountable.
Fannie and Freddie, you're right. I mean, it's a government. It's a quasi-government function, but it's enough. But Fannie and Freddie entered into that subprime market 4 years after all the major banks did. Believe me,
but Sam,
you were in high school at this time. I can assure
Sam, let me
you.
finish.
I paid attention to this. Now,
can I finish the point?
Well,
Are you going to continue to argue from authority?
The banks gave bad loans. We need more regulation so they uphold their fiduciary duty.
Okay, so let's. I want to finish the point on the financial crisis. You couple that.
I want to get to trade and tariffs after that.
The Community Reinvestment Act, which incentivized these banks to give loans to low-income communities. The Community Reinvestment Act, you can read the actual language of the bill, had quotas for banks over a certain level to give these loans out. You triple that with Alan Greenspan artificially lowering interest rates after 9/11. So you had cheap money flowing all around, and all of a sudden people said, oh, you can't question the housing market. It's as stable as can be. When you looked at the mortgages that Fannie and Freddie were AAA rating, a government agency, the banks were trading
Fannie and Freddie did not do the ratings.
Sam,
the ratings were by three agencies that were not government agencies.
Sam, Fannie and Freddie, the banks were trading off the confidence that Fannie and Freddie gave them because they said, oh, but Fannie and Freddie is trading it. Oh, my goodness, we could trade it. So then Goldman Sachs never actually looked through the mortgages because first and foremost, they were incentivized to do it. They had the cheap money from the government. And finally, they had the confidence and the conviction, which was all false, by a government agency to trade on these loans to destabilize our economy. Now, the bankers that lied, like the Wells Fargo's executives that lied, they should be in prison. You and I agree on that.
If there was a scrawl underneath here, it would be really embarrassing for you, because everyone who knows anything about banking knows that there were three rating agencies. Their names were not Fannie Mae and not Freddie Mac.
I never said they were a rating agency. They were trading them as AAA bond rated, and they were set these.
Who rated them?
They were rated by the three rating agencies.
Right. Are those agencies government agencies?
So what did Fannie and Freddie issue?
Yes or no?
JP Morgan?
Yes or no?
They are not government agencies.
That's
independent.
right.
They're independently governed. Hold on. Who is supposed to regulate them? Sam, hold on a second. Who is supposed to regulate them? Did the SEC do their job in regulating them? No.
Part of Dodd-Frank.
I thought the SEC was supposed to keep us safe. It's the biggest government failure of the modern era. The SEC that has a $30 billion budget every single year did not even walk into these rating agencies and say, show me these mortgages. Show me the FICO scores. Show me how they're 18 months delinquent on it.
Dodd-Frank. If you're arguing that regulators were not on the ball, you and I agree. There should be stricter regulation.
I'm arguing that's what happens when you continue to add these layers and layers of regulation, and then you blame capitalism for it. You're like, oh, you have all these regulators that used to work at Goldman, they used to work at Credit Suisse, they used to work at Wells Fargo. They go work for Fannie and Freddie. They go work for the regulators. Right. They say, oh, it's just a failure of capitalism despite government being one AAA bond rating.
I understand you. The failure of regulation to regulate the capitalists who gambled with money that was putting our entire economy in jeopardy. The failure of those regulators to do their job, the answer to that is to have no regulation and just let it be completely wireless.
So, first of all, Dodd-Frank does the exact opposite of it, number one. Number two,
Dodd-Frank tried to regulate
first of all, you know what the
those
solution
three
is?
agencies.
Sam, I'm so glad you asked. You want to know what the solution is? The solution is we should have let the banks fail and make them pay a price for gambling with our money. That's the solution. Because they won't do it again, Sam. If you bail them out and you give the Wall Street executives huge bonuses, and the Wells Fargo executives should be in prison. You and I agree with that.
Yes.
They gambled with our money.
Now, this is, it's interesting because, he's very adamant about this, and I certainly would have had no problem with allowing these banks to fail to a certain extent. Certainly, we came in and bailed out these banks, and so what we should have done, there is a middle ground between this. We can let them fail and everybody suffers because there's no cash that you can take out of your ATM machine. Just doesn't work at that point. I had a friend who was working at Citibank at the time, and she had told her husband, take all the cash out you can of the bank. And, within a 24, but she was very concerned. There's another way that you could have done this. You could have bailed out these banks and just said, we just bailed you out. Let me tell you what happens in the so-called market when someone bails someone else out. You know what that's called? It's coming in and buying a company. And the U.S. government should have ended up owning every dollar for dollar. In fact, they should have gotten a good deal. Should have been we should have probably done 2 for 1. Every dollar the U.S. government had to pump into these banks should have come back with equity.
That's definitely what Bernie would have done.
I think so, and it's certainly what I think it was Iceland did, and
Sweden.
I don't know if Sweden did it, but I think
Sweden
Iceland
did it back in the day. Iceland did it too. Yeah.
Iceland did it during the financial crisis, and we should have nationalized these banks, nationalized the banks that we needed to make sure that the system didn't fall apart. Let the ones that could die, and move on. And now, if it was up to Charlie, all these banks would have gone under. And I don't know what would have occurred then. We would have had a massive meltdown of our financial system because it was allowed to metastasize without being treated.
It's not literally your money in the ATM, Sam. You don't put it in the machine. Sam, that there's not actually a person inside the ATM dispensing money. Right?
They don't take a $10 bill from your bank vault and put it in the ATM before you take it out.
Now he's about to talk about how the Wells Fargo, and there was a lot of these people. There was a lot of people who really abused the system. People who foreclosed on people on purpose. People who ran up these huge things. There was a company called Countrywide. I want you to Google that. And Countrywide, I think, was bought by Bank of America. And if I'm not mistaken, that bank, Countrywide, had to pay, I think, almost $100 million worth of, it was One West. I'm sorry. It was One West. And they had to pay at least $100 million in fines for what they did during this period of time. And its CEO was a guy named... Oh, I know who it was. He was a guy named Steve Mnuchin, who Donald Trump hired to be Treasury Secretary. Continue.
Yes,
but you don't have recourse. You don't have punishment. They're going to do it again.
Yes, I agree. If you don't punish them, they'll do it again. Or if you let them have the regulatory space to do it again, they'll do it again.
No, so that's where you and I disagree. It wasn't the regulatory space. It was Fannie and Freddie that paved the way. They were the ones they were the number one distributor of these falsely labeled AAA bonds. They never actually saw the mortgages they were trading. Fannie and Freddie to this day, they've never opened their books. Okay. We fund them, and they have never opened their books.
We do not. Listen, the bottom line is, the reason why we had such a severe crisis was because of the relationship between the commercial banks and the investment banks. Fannie and Freddie bought those mortgages from those banks 4 years after the run started. I agree with you that you have some of the elements correct. You don't understand the role of Fannie and Freddie in that crisis, but it's largely irrelevant to the point I'm making, which is the crisis was as severe as it was because we rescinded Glass-Steagall under a Democratic president and a Republican Congress. We could go back and we could, today, we could reinstitute it and save the banks. A guy like Steve Mnuchin, I agree with you. He should be in jail. He did this stuff.
I'm not going to talk to Steve personally, but I think where we could agree, where Sam and I agree, is there's something fundamentally wrong, that somehow a prerequisite to run the Treasury Department is working at Goldman Sachs. There's something wrong with that. And that is cronyism.
Well, Steve Mnuchin did not work. Oh, he did work at Goldman Sachs. And then he went to One West and basically committed such a measure of crimes that had Kamala Harris been on top of it in California and listened to her subordinates, Steve Mnuchin might have been indicted. Of course, none of these U.S. attorneys were indicting anybody, and that was also a function of Eric Holder, and that's a whole nother story where he could have gone to, but he didn't because Steve Mnuchin is his daddy's daddy, essentially.
Just about 45 seconds left.
Okay, let's just watch that.
Okay, yeah.
Not capitalism. Now, Sam will say, well, that's what happens when you allow capitalism. I would completely and totally.
Well, when you have corporations gain so much money and power, they're too big, and we need to make them smaller.
I had 4 seconds of an agreement moment, so I want you all to remember.
How does the market make these entities that have too much power smaller?
Competition. Because you know why?
Who's keeping someone from competing with Amazon? Who's keeping?
So I go on at that point to talk about the idea of you can go and attempt to challenge Amazon or challenge Google or challenge one of these banks. But the fact of the matter is because Glass-Steagall, particularly in the context of the bank, because Glass-Steagall was repealed, there were banks that were situated to become behemoths that basically can now close everyone out of the system. So if you're really concerned about the aggregation of power, you need to return to an antitrust regime that predates the Reagan administration, when these companies, whether they were telecommunications or banks or whatnot, were not allowed to buy up other ones and become so huge. And the one thing I will say, and then this video will combine with the rest of this debate, is that if I take Charlie as being sincere on some of these things, that he does have a problem with the consolidation of power, and if I take him seriously on these things, that he's sincere about him, I think that, as he learns more about this stuff, if he really does try to, that, like I say, this guy may end up not doing exactly what he's doing today. But maybe that's being a little bit too hopeful. All right, so
you stay away from my Charlie.
If you're watching on YouTube, we're going to just roll into the beginning of the debate. Let's do the debate. Callers, I don't know how much time we're going to have. Yeah, we could. It's only going to be an hour, so we should... we should be able to do this relatively quickly. I didn't mean to do that. All right.
Subconscious. When you're subconscious, you don't want to hear from callers.
Here is the debate. Now, I should say at the beginning of the debate that we had to submit and fill out or submit questions. Like a series of questions that were supposedly going to keep the debate on track. Not only did the moderator, who seemed like a perfectly nice guy, not only did he not ask those questions, he didn't even introduce us, which was, I thought, a little bit weird. So we went right into it. But here's the debate. We're going to play the debate at 1.2 times the speed. And we'll be stopping it to correct Charlie, and to correct me, and to give some insight as to what's going on. So here is that debate.
Between Charlie Kirk and Sam Seder.
Pause it. It's Seder, not Seder. Go ahead.
So for those who don't know me, my name is Stephen Olikara. I'm the founder of a nonpartisan organization called the Millennial Action Project. I'm honored to be back at Politicon for the 4th year, and we've got a great debate for all of you discussing the middle class and whether Trump has been helpful or hurtful to the middle class, and we'll debate all of that here. My one request of the panelists is that we want to have an exchange of ideas. And so we want to focus on the substance, avoid personal attacks, and my request on behalf of the audience here is that we don't yell over each other, because then they won't be able to understand what you're saying. So are we on board with that?
Yes.
Yes.
We do.
All right. Very good. Are you all ready to get started? Okay, so again, we're here talking about the middle class, and I think perhaps the most consequential piece of legislation.
One thing I did notice, and the reason why we're both have handheld mics, is that I noticed in the debate that Kirk had with Hassan Piker that Hassan did not wear, had a lavalier mic, and Charlie had a handheld mic. Now, of course, you do this if you want to scream over somebody, because you can modulate your voice in a different way. And so I think I'm not exactly sure. I wasn't sure why Charlie didn't show up for the wiring of the mic, but when the guy said, "What kind of mic do you want?" I said, "I'll take what he's taking," and so we both ended up with handheld.
It's like a duel.
Yeah, on some level, it was like, if you want to play this handheld mic game, I will play that game too. So there's a little debate tip for you folks.
President Trump passed related to this was the tax bill last year. So I'm going to start with Sam. What was your take on the tax bill? And more broadly, do you think Trump has been helpful to the middle class?
Well, let me answer your second question first. No. I don't think he's been particularly helpful for the middle class. I don't think that across the board, I'm sure there are some measures perhaps, but across the board, net, things are not better for the middle class now, and certainly down the road they're going to be a lot worse because of policies that we've seen, at least in the first 2 years of this administration. 65% of the tax cuts went to the top 20% of the country. This was, in nominal terms, the biggest tax cut for the middle class in history, or at least recent memory. But at the end of the day, if I turn Charlie's microphone up from a 5 to an 8, and mine from a 5 to a 12 or a 10, that is the dynamic that we have going here with incredible wealth inequality, middle class losing out in terms of wages versus inflation, certainly at least in the first 18 months of the Trump administration versus the last 18 months of the Obama administration, where it was basically flipped. And with increased wealth inequality, you get things like middle class being priced out of the housing market in the top 10 metropolitan areas across the country. You see it in other areas as well. So broadly speaking, at least in terms of the tax cuts, it provides some very inefficient stimulus to the economy, but no, this was for the very wealthy.
Charlie, your response.
I first want to say, Sam, I think you always come about your ideas very thoughtfully, so I look forward to this discussion, sincerely. So.
Me too, thank you.
No.
Pause.
And so the first thing, I would come from the argument that Trump has helped the middle class, and let me build it out in a couple ways. First of all, you did say it was the largest middle class tax cut in recent memory. Now that's not saying a lot, because there hasn't been done a lot for the middle class, but let's define what exactly we mean by the middle class. The middle class, in some ways, is a uniquely American concept. The way that most people would label the middle class, and you could have your own definition, is you have the comfort to send your child to a relatively good school, and your child's life has a greater than likelihood chance that will be better than your life, that you have a median income.
Now, just pause it here. I mean, I'm not sure what the point of this was. It is a uniquely American concept insofar as in most industrialized Western countries, in fact, maybe all, the opportunity to send your kids to school and to get health care and to lead a comfortable life is basically taken for granted. It is not something that has to be aspired to or, a roll of the dice. But
it's like what makes the middle class special here is we have more of a precariat. So you feel extra
exactly.
good about it.
There's a chance it may not happen. So we feel good that we have those things.
Allows you to live comfortable, that you could take maybe 1 to 2 vacations a year, and that you don't have to have an insurmountable amount of debt. Now, that being said, when Americans are polled, anywhere between 70 to 90% of Americans think they're middle class, which of course only 50% of Americans are middle class. So it's really amazing to see the separation of data of how many people think they're middle class versus how many people actually are middle class.
Pause it. Now I understand what he was trying to say here. He was trying to say that those people think they're middle class, and they also think that they are living the life that Charlie uses to define the middle class. And he did this a little bit clumsily, but I see where he was going here. He's saying the concept of middle class, and you may have your own definition, Sam, and so might all those people who define themselves as middle class, may not think that, like, hey, my life allows me 2 vacations a year and I can send my kids to college, no problem. I don't have excessive debt. Because the vast majority of Americans don't get those vacations, do have the debt, worry about sending their kids and getting a good education, and they still may identify themselves as middle class because who wants to, because I know I'm not in the top 1% or 10%, but I don't want to perceive myself as being at the bottom rung of society. Now, I suppose I could have addressed that, but I only now understood his point because he didn't quite deliver that succinctly. But
The reason that I would say that is that we have an elevated standard of living in this country that goes beyond just income and goes actually that people that are earning $30,000 to $40,000 a year have access to higher quality goods that in other countries they wouldn't. But let's talk about the Trump tax cut in particular. First of all, there's a lot of demonization against corporations and against businesses. When businesses thrive, they have to employ people. And so 3.5 million jobs have been created since the start of the Trump administration. Most of those are middle-class jobs. Wages have gone up about 3.8% in the last year. They were flatlining under the Obama presidency. My favorite number...
Wait, I'm sorry,
well,
that's not true. Excuse me?
Hey,
Oh,
hey, hold on. I'm running the panel
You can't
here.
do what you just did.
Excuse me.
well, but
I'm not going to sit here
Sam-
and have lies about facts. Everybody has a phone. Google middle-class wages.
So-
See if they're stagnant versus inflation.
So
But go ahead.
3.8% wage increase over the last year for the median worker. Hispanic income is at its highest level in American history at $50,000 a year. My favorite number of the Trump administration is that 3.9 million people have gone off food stamps and into the labor force. 3.9 million people. Now why is that my favorite number?
Do we know how many people are on food stamps and in the labor force? Like, I don't get that. I didn't get that.
Well,
stat.
no.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
he's saying is like, look, here's the thing about food stamps. Food stamps is what is known as an automatic stabilizer of the economy. When the economy has a dip, or let's say a crisis, like in 2008, more people become eligible for food stamps. It's not that the program is expanded. It's that more people, unfortunately, become eligible because their wages have disappeared and their money has gone away. And so, yes, as you get further out from this crisis, more people get more jobs. Incidentally, as long as we're talking about job creation, and this is something I probably should have brought up during the debate. There were some things I simply forgot to raise. But job creation under Barack Obama's last 20 months was higher than under the first 20 months of Donald Trump. Let me get these numbers. Here we go. 20 months. The first 20 months of the Trump administration, 3.8 million jobs. Is that what he said? 3.8 million jobs?
I think that's what he said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
In the last
3.8?
I thought it was
20 months.
3.8%.
No. That was he's arguing wages, but he said more jobs created. In the last 20 months of the Obama administration, 4.15 million jobs were created. So job creation during the Obama years, the last 20 months, higher than the comparable amount of time that Donald Trump has been president. The wages, he has exactly opposite, although I think what he's doing is he's taking the increase in wages in a very short period of time. He's not taking it for the entire time that Trump is in office. He's taking a very isolated month to make that argument. But if you look back on the past 20 months and you look at wage increases versus inflation, it's a net loss for workers, including the middle class.
For us conservatives, we do not judge success by how many people go on government programs, but instead of how many people go off into independence. Now, I will not say that our economy is at its optimal level. I think it's the best economy in a generation. You look at 4.2% GDP growth, 3.7% unemployment rate. And so if you judge...
All right, pause it. Now, again, he's looking at one quarter, and it is not... He's using a term that is for a very limited period of time. True, but worthless in terms of making an assessment as to the policies. But go ahead.
Middle class by two major things, which is standard of living increase, of which you're seeing that happen dramatically, and the second of which is education. We have a lot of work to do on the education side. I think you and I would both agree on that. We could have an extended conversation about that on policy. But the economic metrics are so good that the New York Times says, quote, "This economy is so good, we're running out of ways to critique it." And so, again, it's not a perfect economy, but for middle-class Americans that care about rising wages, creating jobs, and tax cuts, the average American family had a $2,700 tax cut under this Trump tax cut.
All right, pause it. Here is where I had one of my bigger failures. I didn't really pay attention to what he was saying there, but there is the average family. He uses that figure as opposed to the median family. So that's the old, if Sam Seder and Bill Gates are in a room, the average wealth between the two of us is somewhere around $1 billion or $2 billion or whatever. What does he have? Like 50 billion? I don't know, $25 billion. That's what the average is.
That's if we redistributed all the wealth.
That's what the average is. But the median is something very different because the median is where the family sitting in the middle. And for the median family, the tax cuts was actually closer to about $800. Now, $800 isn't nothing, but if, like I say, if I give Charlie a raise in his volume by 3 units on his microphone, but I give me 7, guess who you're going to hear more from, folks? It's going to be me. And that's the problem. Your purchasing power is, and your political power is diminished if I give that much more money to billionaires.
That's good for consumer spending power, that's good for savings, and it's good for, of course, what you would say is more demand-side economics, coupled with supply-side economics that created jobs and repatriated trillions of dollars of wealth back to America.
So everyone here has a phone, and they can Google the first 18 months of the Trump administration versus the last 18 months of the Obama administration. Wages have gone up 1.7% under the first 18 months of the Trump administration. Inflation is up 3.8%. That is simply a fact. Now, if you narrow the time horizon, you can come up with numbers that you're talking about. And this is why people have to be careful about statistics, because I can come up here and manipulate anything. Yes, Latino wages are up. In fact, the middle class is making more money today than in $61,000 than in the past. However, like I say, inflation is up. The cost of higher education has gone up 110% since 1994. So it doesn't matter if the middle class is making $61,000 if to lead the middle class life that you were talking about is that much more expensive. If the middle class liked the tax cuts, they wouldn't disfavor them far greater than they do even Obamacare at this point, right? I mean, so the bottom line is, we can throw out statistics, but if they're not contextualized, it doesn't matter.
Okay, so
everyone knows the tax cuts went to the wealthy. Am I demonizing them? No. The point is that they have an inordinate amount of wealth and income in this country, and it turns into political power. And I know you have a problem with that. And the way to solve that is to flatten the tax, is to not give them tax cuts and more power, and give corporations more power and cash to pay off their shareholders, which tend to be the board of directors and the CEOs, but rather to spread the wealth.
So, okay. There are some things I agreed with. However, to contextualize it further, it doesn't make the economic growth, the economic success any less exceptional or any less historic, because
it's following the same trajectory as the Obama administration. It goes like this.
Okay, so
he hasn't screwed it up.
Sam, I routinely restrain myself during your comments to allow you.
Thank you for that, Charlie.
And that's a big deal for me. If you watched yesterday,
feel free to interrupt me when you think I've said something wrong.
If that you heard it, everyone heard it.
Well, that's
okay,
can we do that one more time? That is such a smart move. It's so because
I had to, because he just lies.
He just well, no, well, of course, but also practically. I mean, practically because he just lies. But I mean, there's no escape. What is he going to say? No, we should stick to format so I can lie. It's beautiful. And then also, you look really accountable. Like, hey, man, let's both be honest.
Totally.
By all means, if I'm wrong or God forbid being dishonest, please correct me.
Through a couple points there. The first of all, the big misconception that I have with your original analysis is that just because someone gets rich, someone got poor. That is categorically false. If a wealthy person increases their net worth, they did not exploit someone to get wealthier. They had to take a risk, employ a bunch of people, buy a building, have a really good idea, and people had to continue to buy that.
Now, in a slightly different topic, I would have addressed the fact that, of course, yes, they're exploiting their labor. They're both doing it in terms of like a Marxist critique, but also many times in this country, particularly under Trump, when you have rolled back all sorts of protections for workers, they're doing it in a more explicit, almost illegal way.
Well, you're doing it in a liberal way, which is you're violating contract law.
Right, exactly.
That's pretty simple.
Exactly.
Those products over and over again. And you and I will have a philosophical and economic difference in this. I come from a perspective that does not believe in the zero-sum game and does not believe in the fixed pie fallacy. Instead, I believe that when someone gets richer, they must employ an extraordinary amount of people. They had to take a huge risk. They had a higher than likely chance not to.
Now, wait a second. Now, a lot of people thought he was like baiting me on that, but when we have talked about zero sum, it has not been in the context of economic growth, and that's what he's talking.
But I think they just pick. I mean, he mentioned it enough that it's hard to imagine that they didn't have some. And also, you think that he? I mean,
he hits it 4 times.
I would give him some credit. I'm sure he or somebody around him listened to the show once or twice.
It's a total misunderstanding of the.
Wait! Are you telling me?
Okay, continue.
To succeed, they probably borrowed money, and then they had to create something that all of us had to buy over and over and over again. That inherently allows the standard of living to increase for all people, prices to usually go down, and then you enter competition. It's very, very difficult to do that time and time again. And you see in market-based economies, you have to have really, really good ideas for a long period of time to accumulate that kind of wealth. With that being said, those that get wealthy because of access to power, such as 8 out of the 10 wealthiest counties in America around Washington, D.C., they're not actually creating anything that I would consider to be of value to the middle class, because they're being rewarded to their geographic proximity to a $4.4 trillion federal budget that is extracting money away from middle class Americans. Those are the lobbyists, those are the trial lawyers, those are the people working for the corporations that are lobbying not on behalf of middle America, but on behalf of people around Washington, D.C. So in that, you and I will agree.
Well, okay. The people who live in the counties you're talking about are overwhelmingly arms sales and military-industrial complex people.
I'm not
the Trump
defending
administration raised the budget of the military
I don't agree
by $700 billion over the next 10 years.
But Sam,
that money's flowing into those. Is that right or wrong?
I don't agree with that, though. So I will have a consensus that
but my point is Donald Trump is the one who is leading that extraction of wealth.
So first of all,
but let me finish.
Didn't you say I can interrupt you if you said
I said something wrong?
Yes. So it's only $700 billion of our budget every single year. What's the rest? It's to entitlements. It is to the bureaucracies. How about the government contracts for housing and urban development? The government contracts for health and human services.
Well, you were talking
what about the government contracts? Yeah. So those counties that get the government contracts outside of the defense contracts are also what I put my critique on.
Minuscule.
The $3.2 trillion is not minuscule.
It's a made-up number. Let's talk Kansas for a moment, shall we? Because
I wish you explained why it was a made-up number.
Well, all right. So the fact of the matter is that our budget, the biggest expenses we have are Medicare, Social Security, and the military. And then the entire rest of the government is like about a fifth of the remaining money that we spend. Maybe it's a little bit less than a fifth, but let's just call it a fifth. And so the HUD contracts that he's talking about are minuscule compared to the rest of the budget. And I got news for you. Here's what no one in those counties are making money off of: Social Security. They're not. There's no way for them. They're not selling Social Security.
I like how he agrees with you about the military industrial contractors in Virginia, but the second thing he had to mention was, as opposed to that, the most famous thing in those suburbs, he mentioned trial lawyers.
There's no trial lawyers living in those areas either. I would say that that is probably one of the few jurisdictions where there's just not a lot of trial lawyers.
You don't know about all the trial lawyer think tanks in Arlington that are funded by Lockheed Martin and Raytheon?
Part of the problem is like with some of the times, and this is something that I got to work on in the context of the debate, is like I couldn't even understand what his point was. It was so sort of disparate. So I had to choose one. And that's basically the trick in these things, is that what is the overall notion is that you're getting ripped off by 5 different groups that are just maybe associated with what he's talking about, maybe not. And so you pick one. But then I wanted to basically take the offensive and talk about Kansas, because theoretically we were still talking about the tax cuts because it was the only question the moderator asked.
Okay. You can talk about what a small business does for employment. I'm a small businessman, and I understand what small business does. In Kansas, if I had been living in Kansas, I would have gotten a huge tax break because I'm an S-corp. Huge. Under Sam Brown back in 2012. He brought in Arthur Laffer, who I'm sure you're familiar with, is the god for folks like you in many respects. The idea being, if we cut taxes on the wealthy, they will spread this wealth. It will trickle down on all of us. It will shower down on us, right? It will rain upon us. And we will all be sprinkled with this golden shower, if you will. And the economy will explode. And people will have jobs, and everything will work out. In fact, revenue will go up. That's what Mitch McConnell told us after this tax cut, too. And what happened in Kansas was a disaster. It was such an unmitigated disaster. Not only did it destroy Kansas's educational system, The Republican-controlled State House rose taxes 4 years later because their economic growth lagged, their employment lagged, and then Sam Brownback was literally made ambassador to like ether, right? He's like the ambassador to religion now. He's been jettisoned into the atmosphere in some way because that is the perfect example of the Republican conservative philosophy, and it failed. And we know that it's failing now on a national level
can I chip in here?
because Mitch McConnell made the same promise about the deficit. In fact, Larry Kudlow, the chief economic advisor of the president, made the same promise in July. And we now have a deficit that is twice the size it was when Obama left office. And now Mitch McConnell wants to cut Medicare and Social Security because of those taxes.
You're not going to hear me. You're not going to hear me defend federal
pause
deficits.
it for 1 second. Now, I will just say this. Some people had a complaint that I was using the deficits in this context because there really isn't a problem with these deficits. However, deficits are used exactly in the way that Mitch McConnell has used them, which is to justify, because most people in this country, and I am not one of those people, but I live in this country and I have to take the terms as they exist on some level. I could argue that deficits don't matter, but then I've taken myself out of this argument. And once I argue that deficits don't matter in this context, I don't have a response for why, the way that Mitch McConnell uses them. And so they are using these as a justification, these deficits as a justification for cutting Social Security and Medicare. And so I didn't want to have the argument about MMT in this context because it wasn't just a modern monetary theory. But so I just want to note that for people. I don't think deficits are that problematic, except to the extent that they are used as a justification to cut the most important programs for Americans. So really, in many respects, when you get a tax cut like this, it is zero sum, because if it wasn't zero sum, for them, they wouldn't pretend to care about the deficit.
Or our exploding national debt. Quick fact, Barack Obama added more debt than any other president in U.S. history.
Do you defend these tax cuts that have doubled the deficit?
So the tax cuts should have been coupled with spending cuts. However, we have explosive economic growth. We have more people in the labor force than ever
That's
before.
revenue coming in.
We have trillions of dollars repatriating back to America. Let me finish. I allowed you to have your Kansas example. Now that we're talking about states, let's talk about the juxtaposition of the failed state of California with the successful state of Texas. And I think I want a country that's going to look a lot more like Florida and Texas and a lot less like Illinois and California. Now, what have states like Illinois and California done? Well, they're losing citizens, number one. They're losing job creators. They're losing entrepreneurs because they have raised taxes. They have reckless politicians in both states like Illinois and California. What have Texas and Florida done? They've kept their taxes low. Both have no state income tax. They have deregulated their economies, and Sam would even agree with that. Texas, during the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, 2010, comprised 1 out of 3 of all jobs created across the country. And if you couple that with, if you juxtapose that, if you will,
all right,
with
pause
Illinois.
it. Now, all through this diatribe, we had basically the oil and gas and fracking. Like in North Dakota, there was also like huge job creation.
Pretty good job creation.
Because of fracking, which have large costs associated with them.
It's win-win.
Right, in terms of climate change and in terms of people's health. And I don't think Florida is the place you want to go to talk about enormous economic growth. And Illinois has a Republican governor. But the point is, like, all of this stuff is pretty narrow. But this is where he wanted to go. So I continue.
That in the Midwest is booming except Illinois. Every state in the Midwest has a 3% GDP growth. Illinois has a 1.8% GDP growth, despite Chicago being an exceptional city that's being screwed up by corrupt politicians in one political party. And you look at California, that should be the most prosperous, that should be the richest state in the country. And yes, you'll say it is the richest country. It also is the most populous country, with the most amount of homeless people, with the most amount of people living in poverty, with crumbling schools.
Pause it. Yes, one would expect the most populous country to have the most amount of people associated with societal ills. So if you have the most amount of people in the country living in a state, the most populous state will more than likely have the most populous homeless population.
Yeah, I mean, and also, I mean, even more. But there's. I was actually just talking with Waz about this the other day. Like, there's more of some certain aspects of homelessness around LA, as an example, because the weather's nice. And
Well,
it's
yes.
an easier place to do that. So people come from other places so they don't freeze to death in the winter. Sort of makes sense. But also, I would even say, like, just slightly more substantively, like, and you don't have time to get into this, but like, this also is a difference inside the broad center-left to left coalition, because certainly, like, the more liberal California legislature has proposed doing a bit more for this stuff, and Jerry Brown's a tightwad. He doesn't want to spend money, and they don't want to tax the Silicon Valley people. So to the extent it even is true because of policy, it's true from a left, even just a Keynesian critique.
Democrats aren't as socialist as
yeah,
Kirk thinks.
Yeah, right. The Democrats are basically keeping tax rates
This is
lower.
an argument why they should be doing more.
Right,
But in the conservative mind, homelessness is not something that is a situation that has happened to people. Being on food stamps is not providing a baseline so that people can eat. It is a virus that is distinct from people and that you can catch, as opposed to a condition that people find themselves in for a myriad of reasons that we could impact the condition. But there is a certain, morality that is associated with this. So they think it's like something like that is a virus that spreads to people if you have Democrats around them.
Let me finish, Sam. I know you got plenty of differences, but as long as if you want to talk about states, allow me to address the Kansas example. Kansas, if you look at Kansas versus a state like Connecticut, Kansas had higher economic growth and was creating more jobs versus similar size, similar population blue states during the Brownback tax cuts. There are a lot of other contributing factors to why Kansas was not exactly a pristine example of how to run a state, such as government corruption, such as misallocation of resources, and other diminishing businesses that went to states like Texas that had a zero state income tax. And so if you want to talk about the contrast of states, it's the red states that are rated 9 out of 10 of the most pro-business states in America have Republican governors and Republican legislatures. The most pro-growth states in America are run by Republicans. I'm glad you mentioned it, though.
The reason why I bring up Kansas is because the dynamic is identical to the one that Donald Trump, this is what we're talking about, that Donald Trump and the Republicans did on a national level. Now, here's how the game works, and this is why it is zero-sum. Because you give these massive tax cuts to the wealthy, and you repatriate money from overseas that ends up going into shareholder buybacks, to stock buybacks. We know that 84% of stocks in this country are owned by the top 10%.
This is a great point.
Great. And 60% of those tax dollars that were repatriated went into the hands of those people. We saw no job growth as a function of that repatriation. We saw none of the trickle down that we're supposed to see. We see these tax cuts, and then Mitch McConnell brings down the hammer. We're going to cut Social Security. We're going to cut Medicare. These are the most popular, the most successful programs in the country, and the only way the Republicans can cut them is to create an economic crisis, and that is by giving money to wealthy people.
Okay, so let's talk about the stock buyback. So let's talk about the stock buyback. So you say 84%. What that doesn't contextualize, to use your word, is money managers that are controlling money for pension funds. So
that does include
no, it doesn't.
pension funds,
Sam, it does
401ks.
not. Sam, it does not.
Look it
Goldman
up.
Sachs controls money for the California State Pension Fund. It's categorized as Goldman Sachs controlling that money, not as the pension fund. So when the stock market goes up, the teachers, the firefighters, the police officers, their 401ks go up, their pensions go up, and their net worth goes up. So when the stock market explodes, Sam, I allowed you to finish.
You're lying.
Okay, so so when a money
Google it
manager,
now.
for example, when GCTR partners from Chicago, Sam, answer the question. When Goldman Sachs controls the California State Pension Fund, is it classified as the California State Pension Fund buying the securities or Goldman Sachs buying the securities? Goldman Sachs. So when you use, that's true.
84%. I will tell you what the number is.
Okay.
Google it.
Again, so
84%
your number
of
is
stocks
correct.
in this country.
However, to add context to it, Sam, is that the money manager is in the 1%, but the money they're managing is pension fund money that are people in the middle class. So what you're saying is not incorrect, but it's only half true because it is the middle class people's money that they're managing. With that being said, let's use an example. Zero evidence that repatriation created any jobs. I'll use a microcosm example. How about Foxconn that created 4,000 jobs in Wisconsin because they repatriated the money away from Chinese manufacturing jobs to American manufacturing jobs?
All right, pause it for 1 second. All right, first off, I have tried to track down this concept that he's suggesting, that the manager of... Where is that coming from? Oh, I don't know. Maybe that's coming out of my thing. All right, that the manager of a fund is listed as the owner of the fund. Now, I don't know how to disprove that. I'm looking at the Edward Wolf NIBAR paper 24085 issued in November of 2017 that talked about the asset plunges prices plunging between 2007 and 2010 and who owned the stocks. And it includes 401ks and pensions and whatnot. I don't know if pensions would be classified by who manages them. That does not make sense to me because it's called the California pension. And we have some awareness of that. Yes, that is a huge several billion-dollar pension. It's a lot of people. Nevertheless, there are trillions of dollars invested in all sorts of in our markets.
And by the way, that's another maneuver there too, right? Not that you had time or it would have been useful necessarily, but like, yeah, maybe we should have a debate about Goldman Sachs and other Wall Street banks wiping out public pension funds with reckless bets on policies you supported being deregulated.
We do actually later in the thing. But and then he goes on to talk about Foxconn. Now, he talks about Foxconn repatriating funds to Wisconsin from China. And I should have addressed this because I was aware that Wisconsin is paying out $4 billion plus to Foxconn in incentives to get them to function in their country. I had not heard that. First of all, I had presumed that it was more jobs than 4,000. Plus, his use of repatriated does not make sense. The repatriation is about American companies who had overseas profits, and we're bringing that money back in as part of the tax deal at lower tax rates than they otherwise would have paid. And that's what repatriation referred to. And so when he brought up the Foxconn thing, I should have pushed back on this. And I think at the time I was thinking, like, I don't know what he's talking about. Like, he's talking about something that I think is different from what I know about because he's using the wrong words. Foxconn is not repatriating anything because they didn't start here.
They're getting a sweetheart deal to open a factory.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're repatriating all of these Chinese villages that they stole from America because of globalist trade deals.
Well, but that was part of the problem there, and so I got sort of thrown off, and I should have pushed back on that because, first off, this is the guy who doesn't want government intervention in the free market, and this is not terribly free markety from my perspective. But all right, continue.
Yeah, subsidy and Fox.
4,000 new jobs were created in Wisconsin because of the Trump tax cut that they directly attributed to a pro-business, pro-American mindset. That's 4,000 jobs in Wisconsin that otherwise did not exist under a Republican governor, Republican state legislature, and a president. Now, that's a microcosm example. You said there's zero evidence. That's a piece of evidence.
Well, look, people can look at the last time a Republican president repatriated that money. It was the American Jobs Creation Act, 2005. George Bush promoted this. He has come out and subsequently said that he got rolled because all those companies that wanted that to supposedly add jobs, cut jobs. We know these money went to buybacks. We know why buybacks are illegal now because of the Republican Party changed that regulation in the 80s when it used to be called stock manipulation. And we know that it benefits the CEOs and the shareholders and that 84%. And it does not, it includes the California pensions. It includes every municipal and state pension and 401k in the country. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So, but here's another thing I do want to talk about because you talk about, can you explain to me when someone gets richer, who exactly gets poorer? Can you explain how that process works? Like for example, when
I'll explain to you.
So who gets?
Folks, you understand the idea of buying power, right? If I give you, ma'am, $10 and school costs $10, you buy a school. But if school goes up to $20, then you don't have the same buying power. What drives the price of, let's say, housing, for instance? It is wealth inequality. And you see this in 10 cities across the country, the biggest metropolitan areas in the country. The middle class cannot afford to live there anymore because we have real estate going through the roof.
You're right. And so you have in states such as Illinois and Connecticut and California, because of excessive property taxes, people don't want to purchase some of those houses. So you have one of two problems that happen. Is that the middle class gets priced out. So the wealthy, if you will, the people that you are demonizing, will go up a bracket, and they'll say, well, if I'm going to pay $35,000 a year in property taxes, I might as well buy this XYZ house. Therefore, the middle class person who's trying to sell their house with an excessive property tax burden property taxes are one of the main reasons.
I'm a homeowner. I know what taxes are, and they're not nearly as much as if the price goes up.
Again, so in states like Illinois, this property taxes can be anywhere between 6.5% to 9% for a state that doesn't work, for schools are completely and totally broken. So, but like, the foreign investment thing. So I'm still trying to get back.
Pause it. I didn't know how to address what he's saying there, because he's just the words don't connect. He's mentioning the state taxes. If state taxes were so high, it would have an adverse impact on prices. It would drop the price of the house. I mean, overall, you could say it's too expensive, but it doesn't even track with what he's saying. But he does just keep going.
He's got a deep well of talking points, and it doesn't really matter how relevant they are.
It's pretty impressive in that respect, but go ahead.
Some game. When an entrepreneur renders a service and employs a bunch of people, and you buy that service, who is getting poorer in that transaction? Because you said zero-sum game. I'm trying to understand.
I'm
in
talking
a market
about
economy,
tax cuts.
No, you're right. So tax cut, where an average middle-class family had a $2,700 tax cut, where you have the corporate rate that went from 35% effective. I understand a lot of corporations did not pay that. They used loopholes, of which I disagree with completely. Went down to 20% effective in January, and they used that money to invest in capital infrastructure, or they repatriate
Stock buybacks.
So
they're using the money to buy
not exclusively. So stock buybacks. How about companies where the actual employees own the stock, and their own net worth goes up? Aren't they part of the middle class?
I am sure there are some members of the middle class who benefited from the tax cut.
That's what I'm saying, Sam.
The overwhelming thrust. Who's keeping someone from competing with Amazon?
That was the TYT.
What was that?
It looks like the TYT cut that out. I don't know. That's this stream here.
That's strange. Wow, did we lose? That couldn't have been much. That could have been just a blip.
Who's keeping someone from competing with Google?
Oh, okay, so I'm glad you asked.
Who's keeping someone?
Nobody. But you know who's keeping them from?
major bank?
You know who's trying to compete? Who's preventing them from keeping to prevent against Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan? The Dodd-Frank bill, because it has so much regulation and such cumbersome rules, it disallows the local community bank from ever competing against them.
The local community bank is going to compete against Goldman Sachs.
Oh wait, hold on. I'm so glad
They've
you.
all been bought.
That's a great question. Where did these banks
All right,
start
hold
from
on for
then,
1
Sam?
second. All right, so I just got an IM going back to the pension funds, and I'm glad some of it. Hi, Sam. Kirk is wrong about pension funds classified by the money manager. I do securities litigation, and these kind of statistics are formulated by the 13F reports. Pension funds report these 13F separately, and they are specific to the fund. I have no idea what he's talking about here. Now, honestly, like in that situation, you need to have a securities attorney.
Yeah, maybe debate isn't the best place to hash some of these things out, right?
Yeah, I mean, some in those areas, I think you just got to. I mean, the idea that I was like, I don't know how to disprove this.
It's
like
a perfect argument in that case.
Yes, exactly. But continue.
Where did Wells Fargo start? It started as a local community bank that eventually did a very good job of running their balance sheets, and then they became one of the Wall Street banks. It's not unheard of that
when there was no Dodd-Frank.
Exactly right. It was before Dodd-Frank, Sam.
Right. And they were not allowed to merge until that 96.
No, again, I think there is some merit to your Glass-Steagall argument. I do not think that is the primary factor why 2008 happened, nor would I say that reinstating Glass-Steagall will have competition
Wait,
back
did
on.
we miss that? All that Glass-Steagall stuff?
What happened?
There's a big gap in that. That's strange. There was a big gap when we were talking about the Glass-Steagall because we're returning to it. All right, well, let's continue here. We'll try and find that segment that's missing. It's weird.
Wall Street. We will get competition back on Wall Street when we decentralize the SEC, when we decentralize the FDIC. We make it easier for people to give out loans and have FDIC deposit.
Like, I don't know what the words decentralize the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation means. Like, I don't. Like, that's the thing, is that there are times where he would say stuff like, I don't even understand what like, I know what the FDIC is, and I know what a decentralized means, but how would you decentralize this? This is an insurance fund, so that when you put in money into a bank, up to $250,000, I believe it is, for each individual depositor, at each bank. In the event that the bank goes under, because they have made a series of bad loans, let's say, and the loans go south. And certainly in the run up to 2008, we started to see this quite a bit. They make too many loans, the businesses go out of business, and because they loan not only out, what's in the bank, what's in the deposits, but a certain percentage more than that, people could stand to lose all their money. And so the only way these banks can function in a way that is confident for people and you don't get bank runs is if the federal government says, like, look, we get you covered for the first 250 grand you got in that bank. And I don't know what it even means to decentralize it. Like, I don't know.
Bitcoin.
Honestly, like, it doesn't.
It's taking a weird, like, there was a line of people, I think, who some were sort of associated with, like, critiques of bureaucracy in the 70s that has almost nothing to do with what they're talking about today. And then maybe I don't know.
He doesn't know.
No.
There's no explanation.
My point is the real explanation is that you could connect those words with a tradition that he is not a part of in terms of policy. But what that is that's a nicer way of
FDIC, though.
Not at all.
I understand what
not
you're
at
saying.
all, and that's a nicer way of just saying he wants to get rid of insuring people's deposits, right? I mean, that's the only abolish the Treasury Department.
No,
or your check should come from several different agencies instead of one.
No, it means that he doesn't know what the FDIC does.
Or he doesn't know what the FDIC does. Yeah.
All right, here, continue.
Insurance backing. That is so hard to do right now because Goldman Sachs doesn't want that competition. It's very simple. When you have someone from Goldman Sachs running the Treasury Department that will probably work for Goldman Sachs after, and they worked for them before, they're going to try to protect Goldman Sachs' interests. What does that look like? Create rules and regulation that make it very hard for other banks to compete with Goldman Sachs. You and I agree with that.
We agree that the middle class is suffering for Trump's continuing to allow Goldman Sachs in there. Maybe we should both vote for Bernie Sanders.
Well, so
Elizabeth Warren.
And again, it's important to remember it's not just a Republican or Democrat thing. Both parties allow Goldman Sachs to run the Treasury Department. But let me say this:
Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders definitively would.
Well, she might 1,024th allow it to be run, but
there you go.
1,024th, the Treasury Department might be run by someone.
Go for it twice.
Go for it twice. He actually tried to make that joke twice.
I know why. Like, I honestly did not hear that.
So when I saw you, I thought Sam is so done right now that he's not even gonna be like, yeah, dude.
Oh my God!
Right?
I didn't know.
You didn't even acknowledge
because that dude was talking. The moderator here. Scroll back. I missed that completely.
Important to remember, it's not just a Republican or Democrat thing. Both parties allow Goldman Sachs to run the Treasury Department. But let me say this:
Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders definitively would.
Well, she might 1,024th allow it to be run, but 1,024th, the Treasury Department might be run by someone from Goldman Sachs.
So, while we still have a little bit of
again.
time, I want to make sure we talk about trade and tariffs. I suspect there might be some agreement, some disagreement here. I'll start with Charlie. Give us your take on Trump's trade policy, his tariffs.
Yeah, pause it. We missed the whole thing where I said we should together
do you agree with it?
support a 21st century.
Yeah, they cut out
Glass
the best
Steagall.
part. Shit.
And all right, well, let's continue. That's very weird. We'll have to track that down.
What's your take?
I have a more nuanced opinion on it. I think what he's doing with China is terrific. I think China.
Well, pause it. They also missed the part where he was talking about the banking. About the.
I feel like they missed the part where you challenged him to list the three.
No, the regulations comes up later, doesn't it? Or no?
Regulations is later,
I think. I hope.
Yeah, partial
Okay.
debate.
Has been an unfair actor on the world stage for far too long. They still are categorized as a developing nation in the World Trade Organization, which allows them access to subsidies. They build a coal-fired power plant every single month, which as soon as they exit as a developing nation, under that certification, it would be much more difficult to do that. Sam and I might actually agree on that.
Pause it.
And
what was also sort of amazing is like you just justified the huge subsidy for Foxconn 20 minutes earlier, and you're crying subsidies to help China now on some type of principled level. Like it's just. Okay.
look, China steals our IP. So the way it works in China is if you want to trade with them, you have to essentially form a partnership with the government. They'll copy your good or service, and then they'll sell it back into the market that you're competing in, probably quicker than it will take for you to manufacture back in that country. Generally, I'm a free trade guy, and if the goal is to get to low tariffs with some of these countries, I'm all for it. But with China, I consider them to be the great existential threat of the West and of America, and I totally, completely support what Trump is doing with China.
IP is not pro-free trade, just technically speaking, right?
Well, technically speaking, but I mean, in terms of, yeah, I mean, the United States has written every single trade agreement with loads of IP regulations that are bad for public health. So, like,
you know what country built its publishing industry off of no copyright and IP laws in the 19th century? United States.
The United States, they sure did, but not when it came to South Africa delivering generic AIDS drugs to their people. Then you needed to tighten up on that.
Sam.
The Trump tariffs on China, and there are issues to some extent with China. The Trump tariffs on China are a tax on the U.S. Middle class. Ford is going to be laying off close to 12% of their workforce as a function of these steel tariffs. You have a lot of smaller companies that are looking for exclusions to these steel tariffs that make pipe fittings or whatnot. The Trump administration, because they have big donors who are major U.S. steel manufacturers, have denied every single one of those waivers. You see it with Iowa farmers who are paying stand up to about $620 million worth of cost to Iowa farmers. So from a middle class perspective, I think the tariffs are damaging them. There's some benefit in the new NAFTA to some auto workers, but it codifies the monopolies by Big Pharma by forcing these monopolies on Canada as well. And really, look, the number one issue that the middle class is facing is healthcare. And that's why we see every election across the country, we see Democrats running on healthcare and Republicans pretending that they're not signed on to the lawsuit that will destroy some of the most popular elements of the Affordable Care Act / patient protection bill. So maybe we could turn to that where it'll be a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the trade, I think we can agree on part of it and disagree. Let's talk about healthcare. First of all, the Trump tax cut also included a repeal of the individual mandate, which was the largest tax on our generation. And if you don't believe it's a tax, just read John Roberts' opinion that upheld Obamacare. It is a tax on people that do not need to necessarily buy health insurance by force, and were being forced to buy something that was completely out of their income bracket. But in healthcare in particular, there have been bill after bill that would have lowered premiums, that would have allowed health insurance to be bought across state lines, that have been opposed bitterly by Democrats and some Republicans because they're bought by the health insurance companies. And I would be much more on the side of that we need to actually have a market in healthcare. We have anything but a market. We have an oligopoly controlled by a consortium of health insurance companies that are in bed with the pharmaceutical companies. I agree with Sam, that are also in bed with the regulators from the FDA. And so you can kind of see a constant theme. In healthcare and higher education in particular, which are two things I talk about a lot, the reason why prices continue to skyrocket, in my opinion, which Sam will totally disagree, is an inside-out relationship between the entities that are raising the prices and the entities that are controlling those markets, and the government regulators and government institutions and government politicians, where you actually allow a market to happen and you deregulate and you allow competition and entrepreneurs to cut prices. That will change quite quickly.
There have been probably a dozen waivers for in various states across where insurance companies can sell across states. They don't do it because their risk pools, they're much more comfortable in dealing with markets they know. When they go into other states, they lose money. And that's why they don't do it. The idea that there's any inhibition for insurance companies to sell across states, there is no federal law that says that they can't do it. Each state has their own insurance regulators. That is not a federal law whatsoever. They have tried it time and time again. The risk pools are different. They cannot make money. That's why insurance companies don't do it. What is going on now is 20 Republican states are suing the federal government because of that small tax that was the individual mandate, which incidentally has risen the cost of premiums by almost 15% since Donald Trump has taken office.
So it proves that young people were subsidizing this backwards healthcare system. It proves that our generation was being taxed.
That's right.
Oh, okay, so that's right. So our generation has to pay more for something we're not going to get.
Well, you don't know that you won't get it, right? Now, if the Republicans have their way, you will lose your pre-existing conditions. If you have
that is not correct, Sam.
That is 100% correct.
The bill that was voted down.
I'm talking the lawsuit by 20 Republican states that is not being defended by the Trump administration DOJ. If that lawsuit, which is not being defended by the federal government that has the law, is successful at the Republican-controlled Supreme Court, if you have pre-existing conditions, you can be denied your health insurance or you can be charged through the roof. If you're 26 or younger, you cannot be on your parents' thing. You will have lifetime caps. You will have yearly caps. You will not get essential benefits. You will not get your free colonoscopy. You will not get your free mammogram.
Nothing is free, Sam. Stop saying that. Nothing's free. I mean, someone taxpayer, someone is
your
paying for it. Sam. I mean, come on.
tax-supported mammograms or your colonoscopies. And we will end up paying even more because nothing is free. We pay as a nation.
Just said free colonoscopy.
Or, well, yeah, Charlie.
So taxpayer-funded colonoscopy would be a better way to put it.
Are you paying for the microphone? No. Wait,
No, they're paying me to be here, so
Okay. Look, the bottom line is yes. When government provides you services, it collects tax, and that's the way it way it's paid for. It is far more efficient to have a single payer for health insurance than the private insurance industry, in part for the reasons you mentioned, in part because there's no profit off the top. But for those reasons, we should probably have a single payer health insurance program in this country.
So, but I hear this argument a lot, and I'm hearing you imply it, that somehow a market stops working as soon as it goes into healthcare. Is that something that, I mean, it works in food, it works in housing, it works in technology.
Well, it doesn't work in
down,
housing.
Quality goes up.
It doesn't work in housing.
It doesn't work in housing?
No, we have, you said yourself, we have how many homeless do we have in this country?
Yeah, because California has excessive environmental regulation.
Well, are there
Is
there in Texas are there no homeless?
Yes, in Texas they're far more deregulated than in California.
Do they have homeless people?
Of course, but far less than in the state of California.
And do they have Section 8 housing in Texas?
I'm sorry?
Do they have Section 8 housing in Texas?
Yes, but again, far less than in the state of California.
Would they have more homeless? Of course. So in housing, we see the failure of the private market. We see it certainly in health insurance.
Homelessness is not a failure of the private market.
Countries.
Here's the thing. So the idea is that somehow if you eliminate profit from health, that profit should not be involved in healthcare. That's
right. All right, pause it for 1 second. I just want to give you some more specifics. As of 2017, there were 6 states that enacted laws to allow cross-state sales: Georgia, Kentucky, Maine, Rhode Island, Washington, and Wyoming. None of those states, as of in 2017, had a single new insurer enter its market because of its law. When asked about their law, state officials and insurance experts in those states agreed that establishing a competitive provider network is the primary barrier to new market entrants. Not law. It's just simply, it's too hard to go into a state across state lines because you actually need to know the people and the risk pool that's involved, and it's too risky. Insurance companies are basically gamblers. And under the ACA, there was what were derided by conservatives. And again, I would prefer scrap the entire private industry because this is just more proof that it is not capable of delivering this product. But you'll recall, there were slush funds for insurance companies. And that is because whenever they move into a new market, in this instance, it was providing individual health care to people not associated with their jobs. Remember, the only people who bought new insurance via the ACA were about 10 million Americans who were buying through the exchanges. 4 to 5% of Americans, tops. There was another 4 or 5% got it from Medicaid. The only implications for the rest of us was that the amount of profit you could get on insurance was capped at 20%. And what insurance had to provide was also mandated. So these slush funds would essentially inoculate insurance companies from having to service a new clientele because they couldn't predict how sick these people would be and how much it would cost them to provide services versus how much they would take in premiums. And so these so-called slush funds were set up essentially to smooth that out. We're going to backstop how much you can lose in this situation.
So you blame the market for that?
Right. The market, actually, this is it's a horrible...
Sam, have you been to Texas?
But continue here.
Not only is that, so you would say food is essential to health to living. Why not have government subsidized grocery stores?
We do.
Oh, how?
Sugar, corn, wheat.
We pay farmers not to grow. It's the opposite of we literally subsidize inactivity. We subsidize not producing.
all of these products.
To tell that we subsidize farmers not to produce.
In 1972,
of which, by the way, I bitterly oppose subsidies. Here's the point.
Commerce
Is a market, no matter where a market is allowed to be enacted, whether it be in healthcare, any sort of sector.
So how we subsidize these are, I mean, in some instances, we tell them not to grow it. That raises the price. That is a subsidy. Like we literally hand them money. That is a subsidy. I don't know. You know, like you get stuck. They're like, wait, you're describing a subsidy, and you're saying you're trying to prove the fact that it's not a subsidy. And I don't know beyond like, you know, flashing a dictionary up. It's a subsidy. We subsidize food, of course.
You do know that corn doesn't come from magic seeds, Sam.
You will always see prices go down, quality go up, and more people have access to it.
I know you're
Those are the principles of a market.
But
they don't stop working because you implement
we
them
don't
in
have a
healthcare.
choice if you need health care. LASIK eye surgery is elective.
Wait, so someone who can't see and
Health
might be
is not-
blind that gets LASIK, that's somehow elective. Because LASIK eye surgery is dealing with one of your vital organs. It takes someone with a high specialization degree.
It's
Yet insurance-
elective.
Pause it. Now,
again,
I had seen a debate that he had done a year ago where he brought up LASIK eye, or maybe it was, and so I knew he was going there, so I just jumped on it before he got there, because that's his big example of a surgery that cost a lot of money when it was first done, and then when it was widely adopted, the price of it went down. Now, incidentally, it's the opposite with Invisalign braces. I've noticed, and I imagine that in the context of LASIK surgery, because it's not one specific product, that they don't have the same ability to gouge people. But again, LASIK eye surgery is elective. That's why I kept pointing to my glasses. I have not elected to get LASIK eye surgery. I don't have a choice if you find a tumor in my colon. I'm not going to be like, I'll live with it, because maybe I won't. But continue.
And well, sight might be elective to you. You're wearing glasses, but I wouldn't say that's necessarily elective. But it requires a specialized technician, surgeon, doctor. And so it's not any less important. Here's the thing. There's two different things. There's healthcare and there's health insurance. Two totally different things. We have the best healthcare for those who can afford it, correct? How do you expand access to something and get the price down? A market. It works in everything, Sam.
There's a lot of medical error in America. I don't know.
That's one of the leading causes of death in the United States is medical error. Yeah.
Yeah.
It has failed.
We don't have a market in healthcare. We do not. We limit the amount of doctors that go into healthcare every single year. We have a national doctor quota that the American Medical Association lobbies for. I know you never heard of it. You should Google it, because
We have in this country.
we have a national quota of doctors that the American Medical Association only allow a certain amount of
Now,
doctors.
hold on for a second.
Per
Apparently, we have a. I've never heard of this quota, frankly, and I didn't know anything about it. Now there is I'm looking at a page here, the JOC.com. I don't know what the JOC is. The doctor quota. This is from 1997, and it is possible that the AMA won't accredit enough schools, I guess. I'm not sure what's involved with that. But I certainly am in favor of driving down the price of doctors. I mean, the pay of doctors. But I guess there's some type of rationing of medical degrees in the United States. In terms of the number of medical schools. Now, maybe that's conceivably possible, but I also saw an earlier debate of his where he talked about the ratio of doctors to patients, and he said it was 1 to 1,000. And so I brought that up, but it turns out that the ratio of doctors to patients in other places is actually like higher. So, I mean, lower, I should say. But here, that explains where I'm going with this.
doctors, and how many doctors per patient do we have in this country?
Enlighten me.
We have what, 1 to 1,000, is it?
No, I'm asking you, enlighten me.
I think it's close to 1 to 1.
So when you have more doctors doing something, therefore you're going to have more competition in that pool, which would bring down prices. And by the way, speaking of pricing,
smaller ratio, far larger ratio in the other Western industrialized nations. And in fact, they spend far less on healthcare and have
they
better
pay it
health
in
outcomes.
taxes, though. Sam, here's the thing. So you comment
The
on
Mercatus
countries.
study. You're familiar with the Mercatus study, yes?
No, tell me what it is.
Mercatus is
Mercatus. I'm sorry, the Mercatus study.
correct. The Mercatus study.
Which scored Bernie Sanders $25 trillion.
32 trillion.
32 trillion, right.
It scored Bernie Sanders' single-payer health care program at $32 trillion over the course of 10 years. It scored what we would pay as a nation for health care if we didn't do single-payer as being $35 trillion.
Right. So your solution would then be to take that in taxes and to appropriate it for a single payer.
That's correct.
So I don't want to live in a country that has a 55 to 60% tax rate to pay for something that I'm never going to benefit
Here's
from.
the problem you have. Here's the problem Charlie has.
So don't tell me what to do with my money and take away 60% of my earnings to pay for something that I'm not going to benefit from.
If Charlie doesn't want to live in a country that appropriates his money to pay for health care for other people, he's got nowhere else to go except for maybe a third world country, because every single other Western industrialized country
I'm going to give you the last word
doing
here.
that for their citizens, and they are saving money and providing better health care outcomes.
With 50 to 60, the highest tax rate, highest tax rate in a country that Sam likes to talk about a lot, Norway, is 78%. That's not a country that I want to live in. And maybe it is. Maybe
this country had 90% highest tax rate for 30 years during the.
That's marginal versus effective, Sam. You know there's a difference. Do not demagogue it.
Marginal.
Explain to the audience marginal versus effective. You just demagogue something.
Why
What's marginal
does
versus
he
effective?
like
Here,
the
this is
word
what is-
demagogue so much?
Well,
He's
first
really
of all,
into that.
It's a
marginal
verb
versus
now.
effective. Like, I don't.
Why does he think that's
You
such
don't,
a
like-
slam
Not
dunk?
opposing.
I don't.
Yeah.
They're not. I don't think he understands fully what that difference is. Like, the marginal rate is like it runs contrary to the point he's trying to make. I think like the effective tax rate of people at that time, back when the marginal tax rate was 90% for every dollar made after, I think it was 470,000, what would be equivalent to somewhere to $2 to $3 million today. The effective tax rate would be like after you do all your tax loopholes, how much are you really paying? So it would be less. But I'm making the argument in this country that we've paid more taxes. And those tax loopholes haven't gone away. So I don't know.
The only way I can interpret it is if he's saying like, yeah, it was 90%, but they weren't actually paying that because they were writing off it till down to like 40. But I don't think that is.
And
But
it would
40
still
would
be higher,
still
and it would
be
still be
higher
higher.
than it
would
would be
still-
today.
Even if you said that, what that would be. I mean, if you were saying people didn't pay 60% of their taxes, which I don't know, like there's a lot of loopholes out there. But
Accountants
that's-
50 years ago were nuts.
Yeah, accountants 50 years ago were very creative.
And the thing is that the taxation in Norway is also is marginal as well. I don't.
Yeah,
I
that's
couldn't
another
figure
thing.
out if he was saying.
And they also get the
the
thing rebated to them, which is their collective share of a nationalized oil industry, which they get a direct deposit back from the government from.
All right. Well, let's listen to where he's trying to go with this.
Marginal tax rate means that for every dollar.
Okay, so it wasn't the effective. That's the difference. It's effective tax rate in Norway is a difference.
Well, the effective tax rate was probably about 80%.
It was 38%. Then it went up to 44%. You just say
Listen, the tax rate.
Oh, that was that
the
moment.
tax
Oh, I
rate-
should tell you. We go back here a little bit. You can hear somebody yell at me, "Shut the fuck up." Some dude did, and now it turns out that that Charlie was wrong. It's not an effective tax rate. It's the marginal tax rate in Norway. I don't know what the effective tax rate would have to be to get 78%, maybe 90, but it's 78%. And for some reason, some guy over in the corner. So was he a sovereign citizen? He could have been.
The guy was passionate about the Norwegian
He
tax
says,
system.
"Shut the fuck up." And you'll notice I put my microphone down and I tell him to go F himself. So he wants
Sam Seder, alpha cuck.
Well, I was
Like
like
it.
I was ready like, are
You don't
serious?
ever interrupt me when I'm talking about taxes.
Exactly, you son of a bitch. Here we go.
50
Charlie
to
gets
60.
the last word.
Highest tax rate, highest tax rate in a country that Sam likes to talk about a lot, Norway, is 78%. That's not a country that I want to live in. And maybe it is. Maybe
This
that's a
country had
conversation.
90% highest tax rate for 30 years during the.
That's
the
marginal
greatest
versus effective, Sam. You know there's a difference. Do not
Yes,
demagogue it.
marginal.
Explain to the audience marginal versus effective. You just
total
demagogue
bluff.
something. What's marginal versus
What does
effective?
he think he's
Marginal tax
achieving
rate
here?
means that for every dollar.
Okay, so,
back
right,
in
so it wasn't the effective. That's the difference. It's effective tax rate in Norway. It's a
well,
difference.
the effective tax rate was probably about 80%.
It was 38%. Then it went up to 44%. You just say
Listen,
go.
The tax rate.
Nice.
The tax rate
This is gonna be the
under
final point.
the tax rate.
Under Dwight D. Eisenhower, went all the way up to 90% on the effective. Not
Every
the marginal.
dollar
finish.
after $400,000 was taxed at a 90% rate. That would be at about $2 million a year now. And so the marginal tax rate, you can work it out. We have such incredible wealth inequality that when you're talking about some of the billionaire funders that we might know,
Or the
Not getting
the
into
effective
that.
tax rate,
We're not getting
the
into that.
effective tax rate is going to be quite high, maybe 85%.
Okay.
Yes, I love
wrap
billionaires that
this up.
created millions of jobs and wealth for all Americans. I think we should applaud those.
Okay. All right.
He
so
personally
we're out of
should.
time.
Yeah.
He personally should absolutely appreciate.
We're out of
billionaires.
time here, but I actually thought that was a very constructive
All right,
debate.
pause it
On
now
the
for
go-
1 second. Now, we should tell you, for whatever reason,
Let's
this
respond to Jank's
this-
breakdown now.
This wait, but this we have the time code on the other one. All right, can we play that other one because it was 19 minutes long that we
missed
lost
19 minutes. Yeah, it was that whole section where you had him name three things that help the middle class. Or
All right,
something.
we'll do that tomorrow because I think the best section of the debate.
Yeah, they clipped out the juicy stuff.
Why did they do that?
It's weird.
Yeah, you gotta talk to Janks.
The best section of the debate, where I think I got him to do the worst, was on when I asked him to name 3 regulations that Donald Trump has cut and how they've helped the middle class. And the first one he mentioned was the coal, basically rolling back the restrictions on coal, which have led to, which create a tremendous amount of obviously it's a problem from standpoint of global warming, but also from health problems. But he claimed that it created 200,000 to 300,000 new jobs in West Virginia, which would mean that something like 1/6 of the total population of West Virginia got new jobs in the past 2 years.
Was the other one about this was it Superfund sites where it's like farmers?
Then he
with
said the
oil?
Consumer Protection Finance,
right.
the CFP. We're gonna go back and find that. That's very strange.
We'll take that whole section.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got to get in touch with TYT and ask them why they have that.
Stepping on your shine a
Who
little
are
bit
they
here.
protecting?
Yeah, exactly.